Hello, it's me. My wrap up is late because I am shitty. I had to sit down because I'm old. In January, I read 9 books. Out of those 9 books, 2 were romances, 2 were fantasy, 1 was science fiction, 1 was a thriller, 1 was a memoir, and 1 was children's literature. Rating systems went from 2.5 all the way up to 5 stars. So my very first read of January was The Wedding Date by Jasmine Gilroy, and I tried so hard to finish this book in December so that it wouldn't be my first read of 2019 because I knew once I got halfway through that book that book was about to be some shit. I didn't want to start my reading for 2019 off on a bad note, but I didn't get it done. I didn't finish it until January 1st. I was this close to not having that be my first read of January. The Wedding Date is about Drew and Alexa who meet when they get stuck together in an elevator. Cutest meet cute ever. Both of them are working professionals. Alexa is black and Drew is white, and they start a little romance. But Drew ends up asking her in the elevator to come be his wedding date, and she's like, okay, why not? I thought the book was really cool because it tackles the issue of interracial dating and race. It also talks about the stigmatization of black youth and how best to kind of help those who are in the juvenile system. Honestly, all those topics were pretty well done. I liked that there was some racial conflict between Drew and Alexa. That's just a normal part of interracial relationships. You know, you two aren't always gonna agree about race. And I loved that we had representation for how black women are treated when they date white men. This is a topic that I have been talking about lately. In my book Diary for the Hate You Give, I talked about how black women get a lot of prejudice from other black folks when they decide to date outside of their race. And what was cool about The Hate You Give is it kind of showed the other side of that. It showed Alexa gets treated like such garbage by the white women that are kind of around Drew who just don't think that she's good enough for him. And of course she's not good enough because she's too black. So as Drew and Alexa find that they are developing feelings for one another, both of them are under the impression that the other person doesn't want to be in a relationship. There's a miscommunication between the two of them, and they go the entire novel without correcting it. It's like the last 40 pages that the two of them finally admit that they like each other. And it was way too juvenile. Like, you cannot tell me that an adult doctor and an adult lawyer are gonna go that long without talking about what's going on between them. Okay. I hate when miscommunication is used as a plot device. I'm gonna need some better writing than that. The book just dragged way too long for me. I had damn near holes in the bottom of my shoes because that book dragged so freaking much. And I ended up giving it 2.5 stars. Wow, I don't know why I couldn't say that. The next book I read was a fantasy. It was an Iliad retelling, The Silence of the Girls by Pat Barker. After reading Circe, I've just become obsessed with Greek mythological retellings. So this book is an Iliad retelling from the perspective of Briseis, who was once a queen. Achilles and his soldiers take hold of their city, and Briseis goes from being a queen to a concubine and a sex slave. I cannot describe how well done the book was, how beautifully it was written. I have a full page full of quotes from this book alone. Hold on, let me see if I can find one for you. Oh my God. Okay, so here's one quote I loved. Yes, I was a slave, and a slave will do anything at all to stop being a thing and become a person again. This is my favorite quote. Men are curiously blind to aggression in women. They're the warriors with the helmets and armor, their swords and spears, and they don't seem to see our battles, or they prefer not to. Perhaps if they realize we're not the gentle creatures they take us for, their own peace of mind would be disturbed. And the final quote that I wrote down was, "The sea loves nobody and can never be trusted." The feminist commentary in this book was amazing, and it relates so much to our modern day world. I ended up giving it 4 out of 5 stars because there were some times where the book was narrated by Achilles. His narration wasn't done super frequently, you know, it was just a few times here and there. But I swear to God, Achilles' narration, his narration was this close from him breaking out into a rap. I felt like at any point in time he was about to be like, yo, I'm getting ready to go into battle. Achilles was using some modern ass words. I can't remember what they were, but I just was like, what kind of anachronistic bullshit am I reading? Wait, I said I was gonna talk about the romances first. God, I suck. Why are you still here? Why haven't you unsubscribed? The second romance that I read was Once Ghosted, Twice Shy by Alyssa Cole. This was one of my most anticipated releases of the year because, as you know, the couple on the cover is a couple in real life, and I just found that to be so magical and beautiful. This book is part of the Reluctant Royals series. I haven't read the series, but you don't need to have read the Reluctant Royals in order to understand this novella. It follows Likotsi, who is one of the side characters. It's basically about how she falls in love with this beautiful woman named Fabiola on the subway, and they had a romance, but Fabiola broke it off without any notice about 7 months ago, and and Lucazzi just has been heartsick ever since. And one day Lucazzi is back on the subway and she re-encounters Fabiola once again. This is my first romance novella and I absolutely incredibly enjoyed it. I thought that the characters were pretty robust. I thought that they were, I can't say well developed because like how much can a person develop throughout the course of a novella? You know what I mean? So I can say that they are pretty well established. And I've seen some reviews where people said that, you know, the novella wasn't long enough for the characters to kind of unfold. I just want to push back against that a little bit because I'm like, if you pick up a novella, I think it kind of goes without saying that the characters aren't gonna have major growth and development in the course of that novella. Like that isn't the function of a novella. I get confused why some people try to read and rate a novella the same way that they would read and rate a book. I also really liked that we talked about immigration in the book and the struggle for immigration. That was really, really cool. The conversation about immigration was really well worked and it didn't just feel like a plot device. Overall, I ended up giving this book 5 out of 5 stars. I'm not saying that it's the best book in the world, but I enjoyed the writing. I enjoyed the romance. You know, there was some steamy queer sex scenes. I was here for it, you know, and I felt like the characters were pretty well established. So I don't have any criticisms at all for this book, but I do warn you, if you're expecting a full-length novel with growth and development, you're not gonna get that from most novellas, I would say. So let's finish up talking about the fantasies. The other fantasy that I read was The Bells by John L. Clayton. In this world, people are born gray, and only with the help of a bell can you become beautiful. The bells are used by the wealthy and the elite to distinguish themselves from the poor and the homeless. So if you have enough money in this society, you can go see a bell and have beauty work done. You can become tall, short, skinny, any kind of hair color, any kind of bone structure, any kind of booty size, any possible modification a belle can do for you. The belles can't use their power on themselves. Camille has been training her whole life with her sisters to ideally become the favorite, and the favorite is given the honor of living in the palace with the king and queen and gets to work exclusively on royalty, and that is Camille's dream. But when Camille receives her placement, she finds that nothing is what it seems and that there is an incredibly dark side to being a belle and that her life, her sisters' lives are in deep, deep shit. I think I've said this before, but this book is like a perfect combination of Girls of Paper and Fire and The Lukes. Those two books had a baby and then this is what the baby was. The world that Camille lives in is basically based off of New Orleans, which I think is super dope. There's a lot of French throughout the novel. There's a lot of New Orleans culture. And I really love the packaging that this book comes in. Like, I think that this is one of the most beautiful covers ever. If you look at the inside, each chapter opens up with one of these graphics, which I think is a really nice touch. Overall, just the way that the book is designed makes you feel like you're in a world that is obsessed with beauty. I am a huge fan of book packaging if it's well done. And I just feel like this book was incredibly well constructed. On top of that, John L. Clayton, I am absolutely convinced is gonna go down in history for her ability to write and set a scene. She is so good at laying down what's happening and making you feel like you're right there. And I think that this is something that J.K. Rowling is really good at as well. This book has some of the most vivid descriptions of colors and food that I've ever heard in my life, although I'm pretty sure everybody in this book has diabetes because none of these motherfuckers have anything but candy to eat. The pacing was enjoyable. There was a satisfying layer of mystery to the book, and I loved when we kind of found out what the dark side of being a belle was. The magic of the bells wasn't just typical magic, it was more like a science. They require instruments and powders and other things to kind of help them pull off their magic, and their magic is based off of a set of very, very rigid conditions, which I thought was cool. It made the magic more sophisticated and nuanced than like, hey, I have the power to do this and I'm gonna wave my hand and you're gonna be a new person. The kingdom politics were incredibly well done, the characters were well fleshed, and they were written in a way that makes you picture them so vividly in your mind. This being said, I hated the romance in this book. It was so fucking tropey. Camille falls for this really arrogant, douchey male. I get why, like she's never met a boy in her whole life, so of course she's gonna be impressed by the first fuckboy to pop along, but I cannot describe the amount of times I rolled my eyes just because of how she was reacting and kind of feeding into this clearly shitty boy. It was so annoying. So Camille definitely feels like a 16-year-old girl. She definitely acts like it at times. And I also want to say that I love how Slytherin she is. If you are a Slytherin, you're definitely gonna love this book because Camille, she does not hide the fact that she wants to be the best belle in the world. She does not hide the fact that she wants power. I just love women who know what they want and they know their worth and they're not gonna settle for anything less. And lastly, I'm gonna say that this book does have a very brief scene of sexual assault. Just be ready for that. I ended up giving this 4.5 stars. I'm probably just gonna rate it 5 stars on Goodreads. And I read one work of science fiction, which was Long Way to a Small Angry Planet by Becky Chambers. This book is out of this world. See what I did there? The world building is amazing, the technology is amazing. I loved the characters. It gave me such Firefly space opera vibes, which is like, honestly, space operas are one of my favorite genres to read. My sci-fi TV shows are pretty much almost all space operas. One of my favorite comics of all time, Copperhead, space opera, a space opera western, which is even better. In this book, we're given an interspecies crew that is on a mission to go to one of the most hostile planets in the galaxy. They were getting paid a lot of money to do this trip, and so despite certain crew members' reservations, they decided to go for it anyway. Just loved the politics between the crew. I loved how every planet that they visited along the way was distinct and had its own political system and its own technology. If you haven't read this book and if you're interested in all science fiction, you should definitely check it out. It is very technical. It's definitely not a gentle science fiction, so if you're kind of like, ooh, I don't like sci-fi, then you probably won't like this book. But man, the writing was beautiful. There were some amazing quotes, amazing messages in it. I absolutely love this story. And if you're wondering who my favorite character was, Sis all the way was my favorite. Sis is basically this giant lizard, and she has these beautiful multicolored feathers, and she comes from a species of people that thrives off of touch. So a lot of humans get turned off by her species because they always need to touch, and they're very open, they're very sex positive, they have a lot of orgies, and they also kind of just don't entertain the notion of biological parenting. Sis has children running around the world that she doesn't see or care for or feel connected to because those children have their own families. So it's just, as somebody who loves the idea of chosen families and who has a chosen family, I just really vibed with Sis, and I loved everything about her character. This book has queerness in it, and there are diverse human characters in it as well. The majority of the galaxy seems like it's composed of people of color, and it was just really cool to see that in a science fiction. Next, I read Leave No Trace by Mindy Mejia, which is a thriller about a speech-language pathologist named Maya who gets put in charge of a very high-profile case. A young man and his father went missing in the woods 10 years ago, and the young man pops back up 10 years later, and he's very violent, he has issues with speech, and people are trying to figure out what happened to him and his father. Much of this book takes place in a mental institution because Maya is a speech-language pathologist. I was incredibly nervous when I opened the book and started reading about how folks with mental illness would be portrayed, and I have to say I don't think that the characters who were mentally ill were used as a plot device at all. And there is a lot of mental illness representation in this book. I liked that MI was talked about as being on a dimensional scale instead of a categorical scale, meaning that there are many degrees by which a person can have mental illness. You know, one person can have depression and be relatively functional, but another person can have depression and be incredibly unfunctional and unable to participate in broader society. So I just liked that the spectrum of how one person can have a mental illness is represented. Writing was pretty good. There was excellent quotes, and I feel like this book was heavily researched. It takes place in northern Minnesota. I live in Minnesota, and I just love how spot on the representation for Minnesota was. It also is one of the most atmospheric books ever. A lot of the book takes place in the woods, and you really feel that eerie, creepy winter wood vibe. So if you kind of are wanting a cozy winter thriller mystery, you should definitely check this out. I ended up giving this 4 stars because some things happened in the book I couldn't suspend my belief for. There were also some decisions and ways that the hospital was run that was just very not representative of how hospitals actually run and function in 2019. So just in order to read this book, you have to suspend your belief system a little bit of psychology. I read Roxane Gay's memoir titled Hunger. Roxane is a Black, queer, Haitian social commentator and writer. I have no idea if commentator is a word, but I'm gonna go with it anyway. She's written Bad Feminist, Not That Bad, Ayiti, which is a short story collection. She's written so much, and all of it is just, everything I read by her is phenomenal. So I was really excited to pick up her memoir, which is about how she became 600 pounds. I'm about to address the topic of sexual violence, so if you don't want to hear anything about that at all, skip ahead to the timestamp below. But when Roxane was 12 years old, she was gang raped by a bunch of boys in her neighborhood, and she never recovered from that awful experience. She turned to eating and very intentionally created a lot of weight on her body because she wanted to build a body that people wouldn't want to touch. In this book, she writes a lot about how she uses her body as a fortress to protect her. When I first heard about this book, which was well before I knew anything about Roxane's writings and knew that I would absolutely fall in love with all of them, my thought with this book was what could a 600-pound woman possibly have to offer me? You know, this book is only gonna be relatable to people who struggle with weight issues. And I'm really ashamed to say that that was my attitude and that was how I felt about this book when I had first heard about it. And I absolutely don't feel that way now. This book helped me grow. It helped me realize that I had some fat phobia issues that I needed to work through. It definitely changed the way that I viewed people that struggle with obesity. That being said, there is a lot of talk of rape in this book. Roxanne also does a lot of commentary on how women of all sizes and all races are treated in society. So there's a lot of feminist commentary in this book that I related to so much. There were so many quotes that I wrote down. I'm not gonna rate this book because I feel uncomfortable assigning a rating to somebody else's memoir and personal experiences. That being said, this is a book that I'm going to purchase. As you guys probably know, I read everything from my library, and then at the end of the year, I purchase the books that really stuck out to me. To wrap up this review, I'm gonna read a quote to you that I wrote down from Hunger that really stuck out to me. The more successful I get, the more I am reminded that in the minds of a great many people, I will never be anything more than my body. No matter what I accomplish, I will be fat, first and foremost. Okay, I lied, one more quote. No one wants to be infected by obesity, largely because people know how they see, treat, and think about fat people, and they do not want such a fate to befall them. The next book I read was The Polar Express by Chris Van Allsburg. It's a piece of children's literature. I read this book when I was a wee little thing, and I loved it so much, and I just wanted to see if the book held up for me as an adult. I am a person who enjoys children's literature. I do want to have a children's literature bookshelf or bookcase in my home someday. I gave this book 5 out of 5 stars. I really felt in the Christmas spirit reading this book with a cup of cocoa and just thinking about how much it meant to me as a kid. I really loved the illustrations and the way it was written and the messages about loss of innocence and belief in magic and hope. Children's literature will always be a top category that I love to read because it reminds me about what's pure and wholesome in the world. The last book I read in January was Black Enough, a collection of short stories edited by Evie Zaboy. These short stories are written by some really heavy-hitting Black modern authors such as Nick Stone and J. Coles and John L. Clayton, who wrote The Bells. And they tackled so many issues. They tackled what it's like to be Black and nerdy and to love computers. There was a story about a teenage Black cowboy who was gay, and it was kind of giving me Romeo and Juliet vibes. There was a story about mental illness. There was a story about Black female sexuality and coming of age. Can you see how heavily I annotated this book? I had so many thoughts going through it, and I know that a lot of people aren't gonna connect with this book because they're gonna say that it's too simplistic. Literally all of the stories in this book are written almost on the middle grade level. They're almost underwritten. And I just want to let people know, especially for my non-Black folks who are watching this and are interested in reading the book or have read it, that was done on purpose. All of these authors, Evie Zaboy included, know that Black kids have historically only had access to stories about them that were either incredibly densely, complexly written, think about Toni Morrison, or they were about incredibly traumatic subject matter where Black kids could only see themselves if we were being beaten, hung, raped, or criminalized. This is the first collection of short stories about Black teenagers living their lives. This has never happened in America before. And because of that, this book is incredibly revolutionary, and I truly believe that all these authors wrote their stories very almost simplistically because Black kids deserve easy. We deserve light and fluffy and silly. There is a story in here about Black boys walking down the street in New York talking about eating sandwiches. That's the whole story. And I know a lot of people aren't gonna see that as revolutionary, but it absolutely is. Because whenever we talk or think about Black boys, there's some sort of trauma associated. So to see a group of Black boys just talking and living their lives is a revolutionary act. And it's also a definite ode to inner city New York culture, because as somebody who has lived in inner city New York, let me tell you, the obsession New Yorkers have with their food and their sandwiches and their bodegas is real. There's so many different stories in this book, and I obviously gave it 5 out of 5 stars. Whew, this was a really chatty video, so thank you if you stuck around to the end. Stay sharp, and I will see you in my next video.